Hello everyone and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. The past two lessons we've been having some technical difficulties in the live classes, so hopefully you're keeping up with the previous videos and catching up while I try to figure out what's wrong. But as you can see, this one is Module 1, Lesson 14, right? We're not condensing two lessons into one this time. That's because Lesson 14 is a very important lesson, and you're going to see why as we go into the lesson. So hopefully by now the problems are fixed in the live classes and y'all are able to go attend the live classes. If not, then please be patient with me and just keep watching the pre-recorded lesson videos to catch up, okay? Again, if you have any questions about what you watch and what we're learning, just let me know, okay? And I'm more than happy to help you out and answer any questions that you might have. But without further ado, let us jump into it. So again, some announcements. Remember to watch the previous lesson videos because I couldn't hold live classes because I couldn't present my screen. So watch 10 and 11 and then 12 and 13, right? 10 and 11 are combined, 12 and 13 are combined. And as you can see, start testing. If you have not done start testing yet, then please come into the office hours to get that done. Remember, this is a mandatory benchmark test. And if you can't do it online, then please let me know so that I can schedule for you to come into the school and take it in person, okay? This is mandatory, is really important, is a benchmark, is so I can see where you are at in your literary and reading skills, okay? And again, lastly, and always, the most important thing, turn in any missing assignments and assessments. I emailed all of your parents yesterday telling them that October 15th is the last day for assignments to be turned in, right? So get those turned in. Also, please turn in your major assessments. Those are 60% of your grade. There will be another major assessment. We're going to have 3 total, so 1 more left, and I will give y'all more information about that as we go further, okay? I know we usually do a intro right here to get us started, but I thought we could just do a refresher. So I graded that poem frame assignment that I gave you a couple weeks ago, and there were a couple problems with it. Some of y'all are still struggling with the concept of metaphors and similes, so I thought we could just go over those quickly right now so that y'all have a better grasp of metaphors and similes, okay? So the definition of a metaphor is a word or a phrase is applied to an object or action which is not literally related. So basically, a word or a phrase is given to an object or an action which usually has no similarities or any context together, and it doesn't use like or as. So examples of a metaphor that I came up with personally that have to deal with the crossover, the book that we're reading, is the first one is Josh is a shining star when playing basketball. So basically, I'm comparing Josh playing basketball to a shining star, right? And you don't see the words like or as in there. Another one is Josh is a king on the court. I'm comparing Josh on the basketball court to a king, right? So those are examples of metaphors that you can make up for yourself in the book. Remember, it's comparing 2 things without the use of like or as, and those 2 things usually are never really put together. Some of y'all did a great job on that Padlet assignment yesterday in the lessons 12 and 13. You remember we were talking about the weather and creating metaphors and similes for it. So if you need a refresher, go look through that Padlet, and I gave a heart to the ones I really liked. So just look through that, see what your classmates are saying, and get a refresher for a metaphor. Hopefully these examples really helped you out. So the definition of a simile is a comparison of one thing with another thing of a different thing. So the definition is very confusing for a simile, but what that essentially is saying is comparing one thing to another thing. And those 2 things usually have nothing to do with each other. They are very different, but they're still being compared, and they're using the words like or as to compare those 2 things. So the example of a simile, the first one that I came up with is Josh is flying through the air like a bird. So Josh flying through the air for a dunk is being compared with the bird. Those 2 things usually have nothing to do together. They have barely any similarities, but they're still being compared with the word like. And it paints a picture of Josh actually soaring through the air like a bird, right, whenever he goes for a dunk. And the second example is Josh is as cool as ice. Again, Josh is being compared to ice, so two things barely have any similarities, but they're still being compared with the word as, right? That is examples of a simile. And again, you can look through that Padlet assignment and look through it. Someone had a really cool thing where it was the weather outside is as cold as the North Pole, right? I thought that was a really good one. It's the weather outside wherever you are is being compared to the North Pole, the weather in the North Pole, right? So whoever came up with that, great job. And again, those are a refresher on metaphors and similes. If you're still having trouble with that, let me know. We can schedule a tutorial session and I can deep dive into metaphors and similes so that you have a further grasp on it. Because metaphors and similes, remember, they really help to jazz up your writing and make it a little bit more exciting for the reader to read it, right? But moving on, we're going to jump into lesson 14. The learning goals is we're going to be able to distill the meaning of the crossover by analyzing meaning and symbolism in free throws. Free throws is the last poem of the book. So we're going to be basically analyzing free throws and figuring out what the essential meaning of the crossover is, okay? So the important questions, the essential question is, what is the power of storytelling? The focusing question is, how does form shape a story's meaning? Remember, form is structure and how the words are written and how the author wants you to read those words, right? The content framing question is, what is the meaning of the crossover? So we're basically going to be diving into what the essential meaning of the crossover is today. And we're going to be doing that by looking at narrative arc, and we're going to be by analyzing free throws. Remember, narrative arc I introduced to you in the last lesson. If you don't know what narrative arc is, please watch that previous lesson video, okay? So again, like I mentioned, narrative arc. So a narrative arc has a beginning, a middle, and an ending with a common theme that holds the story together. Narrative arc is basically how the story is organized and written and how it flows, right? So the question that we're going to be focusing on right now is, how is the story of the crossover organized? That essentially is saying is, how is the crossover written? How is the crossover put together, right? How does it tell the story? So the crossover is essentially organized. You know, we read about the events in the order that they happen, right? They go in order by beginning, middle, and end. And we get to see Josh's development over time, though we don't always know what's going to happen. We can guess what might happen next, right? The events basically follow logically from one to the next. So it's very easy to follow. You can clearly see the beginning where Josh and his family get introduced, where Josh's personality gets introduced, things like that. Then they have a middle where Josh is going through, you know, his suspension from the team, right? His father's health problems, and then the ending where Josh has to overcome all of those things, right? And a lot of stories basically follow that structure, right? A calm middle, a calm beginning, right? A middle where the character has to overcome obstacles and they're getting challenged, and an ending where the character eventually overcomes those obstacles and challenges, right? I would say a majority of stories that you have read have followed that narrative arc, that very simple narrative arc right there, and the crossover does that as well. So, but the structure that the crossover follows is called a linear narrative. So the definition of a linear narrative is a story that moves chronologically through time with events described in the order that they happen. So it actually goes in order, right? The crossover beginning, middle, ending. It doesn't mix up or anything like that. It follows that simple schedule of the first thing that happens, you tell it first, and the last thing that happens, you tell it last. So, which is a very fun thing because, like I said in the previous lesson, right? The narrative arc doesn't always have to follow beginning, middle, or end, right? It doesn't have to follow that. You can easily start with the middle first, then go from the beginning to the end from there, right? You can always start with a conflict and then flash back. You don't always have to start in the beginning where you introduce the character first and, you know, start out like that. But the crossover does follow that narrative arc structure, and that structure is called a linear narrative, where the story is told chronologically, where it's told like the events are told in the time that it happens, right? So again, you can put that in your definition, your vocabulary journal, right? In your digital journal. Remember, that is up to you. I do keep track of that and look through it just to see how y'all are doing. So moving on with narrative arc, the next question I want us to focus on is, how does this organization, right, the linear narrative, shape your understanding of the theme of Josh's sense of himself and the world? Okay, so I want y'all to think about that question and then go into that Padlet link and answer that question. Y'all know how to do Padlet by now. Remember, put your name up top and then answer that question. How does this organization shape your understanding of the theme of Josh's sense of himself and the world? So take your time and come back to this video whenever you're done answering that question, okay? Okay, welcome back. So essentially this question is asking, how does the linear narrative of the crossover help shape your understanding of the theme of the book, right? Of Josh's identity and everything like that. So there are a couple answers to this question. Some of the ones that I came up with is, the organization of the book shows how Josh's sense of himself develops and changes over time. Remember, it is told in a linear chronological order, so you can definitely see his change over time. In the beginning, Josh is a happy, confident kid. In the middle, as conflict develops, the challenges that he has to face, start coming forward. We see Josh becoming more confused, angry, and isolated, right? At the very end, we see some hope that things are getting better for Josh. Again, we're going to see that when we annotate and analyze free throws. Also, the organization shows us that Josh's story is one where he encounters a predicament or a lot of predicaments. A predicament is basically just a challenge or an obstacle, right? So he encounters a lot of challenges and obstacles that upset his life and who he is. He has to work through them, right? They challenged his identity, and he has to work through them to get to where he was before and try to become a better person. The organization also shows how events and experience cause Josh to change. Like I said before, the order, remember, is told in time. It follows the timeline perfectly. There's no deviation from that. There's no changes from that. So we get to see how Josh is changing as a person as it keeps going forward, right? So writers can organize narratives in a lot of different ways. Like I said before in the previous slide, the narrative arc doesn't always have to follow beginning, middle, end. You can switch it up. So some examples of how writers can switch up the narrative arc and help the story be told in a different way is they can open with an event that represents the middle of the action of a story. So an example of how the author Kwame Alexander could have done this in the crossover is he could have began with Josh's suspension from the team, right? His mom telling him, hey, you can't play basketball. And then we can go from there. That could be the beginning. And then they can go back to explain what events led up to it. So we start in the middle with the conflict, and then we flash back to the events, basically the beginning, and what led up to it. And we catch back up to the middle, and we finish on to the end. That's just one way. So the structure of that is what? Middle, beginning, middle, end, right? That, again, is another example of a narrative arc. Remember, it can be changed up. It just always has to have a beginning, middle, end, right? And a common theme to help hold the story together. Another example of how a writer can organize narratives in a different way is it can include different versions of the same event from different characters' point of views. An example of that Kwame Alexander could have done in the crossover is he could have alternated back and forth between Josh and JB as the narrators of the events, right? So instead of always just being Josh telling the story, he could have gone between Josh and JB telling the their own different stories about the same events, right? So we can see two different perspectives. Again, that is another example of a narrative arc and how you can change up your narrative arc. So I want y'all to really think about the crossover, the entire book, and how you would have organized the crossover differently to basically tell the same story, but in a much different way, right? So I want y'all to think about that and then come back to this video whenever you're done thinking, because I think it's a very good thing to think about, okay? So, welcome back. Free throws. We're going to be moving on to the last part of the lesson of analyzing and annotating the last poem in the book. And that poem is found on 234 to 237. Okay? So again, it is the last poem in the book. We're going to be reading it, we're going to be annotating it, and we're going to be analyzing it. Okay? So let me pull it up for y'all. It is a very long poem, so I've had to make it into a PDF again. So, free throws. It only takes me 4 mouthfuls to finish the dessert. I have to jump to get the ball. It is wedged between rim and backboard, evidence of JB trying and failing to dunk. I tap it out and dribble to the free throw line. Dad once made 50 free throws in a row. The most I've ever made was 19. I grip the ball, plant my feet on the line, and shoot the first one. It goes in. I look around to see if anyone is watching. Nope, not anymore. The next 12 shots are good. I name them each a year in my life, a year with my father. By 27, I'm making them with my eyes closed. The orange orb has wings like there's an angel taking it to the hoop. On the 49th shot, I'm only slightly aware that I am moments from 50. The only thing that really matters is that out here in the driveway, shooting free throws, I feel closer to Dad. You feel better, he asks. Dad, I say. I open my eyes and there's my brother. I thought you were... Yeah, I know, he says. I'm good. You? I ask. He nods. Good game last week, he says. That crossover was wicked. Did you see the trophy? I ask. He nods again, still protecting his words from me. Did you talk to Dad before? He told us to stay out of his closet. Then he told me to give you this. You earned it, Filthy, he says, sliding the ring on my finger. My heart leaps into my throat. Dad's championship ring. Between the bouncing and sobbing, I whisper, why? I guess you the man now, Filthy, JB says. And for the first time in my life, I don't want to be. I bet the dishes you missed number 50, he says, walking away. Where's he going? Hey, I shout. We the man. And when he turns around, I toss him the ball. He dribbles back to the top of the key, fixes his eyes on the goal. I watch the ball leave his hands like a bird up high, skating the sky, crossing over us. So again, that was the poem Free Throws. This poem essentially is about the brothers moving on with life without their father, Chuck Bell. So if you haven't been keeping up with the book, Chuck Bell passes away from a heart attack, and this poem takes place after a funeral, and everyone is back at their house, basically celebrating the life of Chuck Bell, right? And Josh comes out to shoot free throws to be away from everybody and remember his dad, and basically what happens in this poem happens, and it ends. I thought this is a very great way to end the poem, right? Because it really sets everything up. And we're going to go over some questions to show why this poem is so significant and how without it, it would be a completely different story. Okay? So some background knowledge. Free throws is a basketball term, is an unhindered shot at the basket from the foul line awarded to a player after a foul or other infringement. So a free throw is essentially free points. So the questions that we're going to be answering and looking at is, what difference does the last poem make to the meaning of the story, right? So this poem is very, very important to the overall book. So as you can see in the poem, what's essentially happening is Josh and JB, they're back together. right? Their relationship is slowly starting to heal. They're back in a familiar place that they used to share with their dad. Chuck Bell used to have his sons out there every single night practicing their free throws, right? That's something they did every night, and that's just a place that they're very familiar with. Also, the poem shows how Josh is different. For the first time in his life, he doesn't want to be the man, right? He doesn't want to be like his father because those are very big shoes to fill, and he doesn't know how to be that without his dad in his life. He doesn't seem as confident or cocky as he was in the beginning of the book. Through all the challenges and obstacles that he's faced, he has changed. He's grown up a little bit, right? He's matured. He's become basically a better version of himself. So why this poem is so different is if we really look at it, if we take away this poem, right, that means the book ends with the poem, "There were so many friends." And that poem is basically just everyone back at their house celebrating the life of Chuck Bell after the funeral. And it's just people just talking about Chuck and Josh short of being alone. JB's not really there. I think he's with Miss Sweetie, his girlfriend. Miss Sweetie calls the house. Josh answers and they talk and they sort of make up a little bit, but Josh and JB are still a little bit on the rocks, right? So why this poem, Free Throws, is so important is without it, it doesn't show that the twins are beginning to repair their relationship, right? If the poem had ended with "there were so many friends," there would not be the suggestion of hope for Josh and JB, right? This poem sort of shows that Josh and JB are healing a little bit, right? Without it, it would have just ended that we don't know if Josh and JB are slowly starting to get better or not, right? And again, by showing the twins, growing and repairing their relationship and showing Josh's growth as a person, Free Throws, the last poem in the book, offers closure to the end of the book, right? It offers closure. It gives us a good, happy ending, right, that we all love, right? Everyone, no matter what they say, they want a happy ending. They love happy endings, right? And Free Throws gives that to us. Without Free Throws, we don't know if Josh is really growing as a person. We don't know if Josh and JB are going to be as close as they used to be, right? And that's what Free Throws offers to us and why it's so important to the overall meaning of the story, right? Because remember, Josh and his family, Josh's family was everything to him, right? They meant the world to him, and showing that Josh and JB are going to be okay in the end really helps us see that family is still a very important thing to Josh. So the next question is, what message does the last poem convey? There's a lot of answers to this one, but a couple that I came up with is, one of them is, even without their father, the boys will be all right? They're always going to have each other, and they're always going to have their mom. So, and as we can see, the hopeful end to it of JB taking the pass from Josh and shooting it, it gives us hope that everything will be all right. That another one is, things are different but the same, right? They're in the same familiar spot. They're shooting free throws. They're still playing basketball, but something is different, right? They're still not going to have their dad anymore, but they're still going to have each other, and they're still going to have basketball. Another one is, Josh has learned that he is best when connected with those he loves. Josh really got away from himself and his family for a little bit, but as you can see in this last poem, you can see that family still means a lot to him, right? And that he still loves his brother no matter what. And then the last one that I came up with is, Josh and JB will always be connected even in hard times. Like I said before, family means a lot to Josh. And JB and Josh are twins, so they always will have that special connection, right? Even if all the troubles that they went through together, they'll still always be there for them. The last question I want to focus on is, why is the title Free Throws an important and appropriate title for the last poem? And how could Free Throw or the term free throw be interpreted as a symbol. So why I think the title Free Throws is such an important title for the last poem, right, is if you remember one of the basketball rules poem, it says, if you miss enough of life's free throws, you will pay for it in the end. So I take this as two meanings. One is Josh is finally taking advantage of life's free points, right? He is grasping life again. He got away from it for a while, but he is finally back, and he is taking advantage of everything. He grew as a person, and he's maturing. The second meaning of it that I took away is it was talking about Chuck, right? Chuck said if you miss enough of life's free throws, you will pay for it in the end, because free throws are essentially free points, right? It's free points that you earned that you're not taking advantage of. And Chuck, throughout the book, knew that he had health problems. Everyone in his life knew he had health problems, but he never went to the hospital until it was too late, and he passed away from his heart problems, right? So I think that it was basically could be talking about his health as well. Chuck had every opportunity to get help and maybe get better before it got too bad, but he waited too long. He paid for it in the end by not getting his heart checked out and dying, passing away. So I thought that could be interpreted as a symbol. Those are two ways that the title Free Throws could be interpreted, and hopefully you are seeing that. And hopefully by us doing this, annotating and analyzing the poem together, you're slowly seeing why Free Throws is such an important poem in the book, and why it is the perfect last poem. Remember, in the narrative arc, the ending is where the character resolves his conflict and overcomes his obstacles, and Free Throws is a perfect example of Josh overcoming his obstacles and repairing the relationship with his brother and taking advantage of life's free chances. And again, if you aren't getting that, or if this was a little bit confusing to you, let me know, and I am more than willing to help out. So again, the wrap up was the meaning of the crossover. What I took away is family must stick together through hard times. Love is a force that connects Josh to his family, right? And they are as closely connected as a basketball in a court. A basketball court needs a basketball, and Josh needs his family. That's essentially what I took away from it, and that you could see that meaning of it just through the last poem, Free Throws. So again, if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, or if you need any extra explanation over what we went over this lesson, just let me know. Remember the 3 ways to contact me: question board, message me on Schoology, or email me. But again, let me know if you have any questions about this lesson. But I will see you here for the next pre-recorded lesson video. Bye.